Hi, my name's Aaron Matthews, and I'm the director of The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien.
Hi, I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the victim of Aaron's film. My children have to live with what they call dad's bad time. So they too will carry the burden of a war.
His mood depends on whether he has good or bad writing days.
The struggle to make something good. And what a struggle.
National Book Award-winning novelist Tim O'Brien here.
The best American writer of his generation.
One of the rare works of recent literature. The things they carried sold more than 2 million copies, and it's helped define Vietnam and the experience of war.
The hard part is I haven't written a book in 15 years.
I have no idea where the handset is. It feels like there's a conspiracy of nature to stop me from writing anything.
Think about what it means to go to war. Now think about it in terms of yourself. Do you want to go?
Tim, when he's writing, it's so intense.
It seems so conspicuous. War sucks.
Yeah.
You're going to be dead forever.
There's the baggage that everybody carries, but he's had a little extra to carry all his life.
I suddenly became a killer of people. It's just the opposite of everything I thought I was. You can see how I feel overwhelmed. I need like another 10 years to write this. I know that time's running out. Have a great day at school, okay? I love you.
Love you too.
It's why I'm writing the book. It's the inspiration that my kids, when I'm dead, will hear their father's voice and understand in life we have to fight through our battles.
That is a trailer from the documentary The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien. And this is Factual America. We're brought to you by Alamo Pictures, a London-based production company making documentaries about America for international audiences. Today we're in for a special treat as we welcome world-renowned author Tim O'Brien to the podcast. And joining Tim is Aaron Matthews, award-winning documentary director and producer of The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien. Aaron and Tim, welcome to Factual America. Aaron, how are things with you?
Really good. Thank you so much for having us.
Hey, it's great having you. Where are you? Are you in Brooklyn?
I'm in Brooklyn, yeah, and we just got like a foot and a half of snow. So that's I'll take any change to the environment these days, and this is like a welcome shift in the visual panorama.
Okay. And Tim, how are things with you?
I'm fine, thank you. I hope you're well.
Oh yeah, I'm well. Are you in Austin?
I'm in Austin, Texas. Yep.
Excellent. So as I said, we've heard, or some have seen, if they're on YouTube, the trailer for The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien. Alex Belth is at Esquire, says, in The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien, we witness a sliver of the time he, Tim, has left with his sons and his wife. Matthews is a disciplined storyteller, uninterested in self-indulgence. It's releasing in March. Aaron, where will we be able to watch this?
Worldwide. You should be able to get it anywhere you want on a number of streaming platforms. March 2nd.
Okay, so people can just March 2nd. We'll make a note of that, and so people can just Google it, and they'll find you someplace.
I hope so. That's the idea.
Okay. All right. So thanks so much, Tim and Aaron, for coming onto the podcast. Congratulations on this finally getting released. I know a lot of people have been waiting for this because it's been certainly in the can for a while. So many themes, so many things we could talk about, but maybe, Aaron, you can kick us off here with a little bit of background about what this film is about and whose idea was this?
The quick log line is renowned author and Vietnam veteran Tim O'Brien is battling to write one final book. So that's the quick synopsis, and then to flesh that out, for people who don't know Tim O'Brien, he's one of the most influential living American writers, National Book Award winner and author of the groundbreaking book, The Things They Carried. If there's one author that young people today can remember, if they can only remember one author, it's usually Tim O'Brien. So the film picks up as Tim is embarking on a new book after not publishing for 15 years. Early in this century, he had sworn off sentences when he became a father for the first time. And this was also right around the time that America was waging new wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And he, like most of us, was trying to wrap his head around what was going on with those wars. And the film chronicles him struggling to finish this one last book.
It certainly does. Now, how did you come up with this idea? I mean, or how do you even pitch this? I'm going to make a film about a guy who spends 12 to 14 hours a day, basically chained to a desk.
Sitting in his underwear, as Tim likes to say.
Well, that too. We see, certainly shorts. Yeah.
Tim talks a lot about sitting in his underwear writing. I don't think he figured that someone would actually document that. The genesis of the film, really, the short answer is Tim himself. I met Tim working on another PBS documentary that was looking at the history of the military draft.
Okay.
And working on that project, I got really interested in how Americans are really disconnected from the wars our nation wages, how so few people in this country bear the burden of killing and dying. And I interviewed Tim for this film, and his interview blew me away. We also hit it off on a personal level. But in terms of his interviewing and what attracted me to him, and then eventually the idea of doing this film, was that he was able to express really big ideas, especially about the meaning and impact of war from a veteran's perspective in a relatable way. And he was a storyteller to boot, a great storyteller.
So you pitched this idea to him about making this film, and
the idea. He said no.
Of course he did. Why would you? Why the hell did you say yes, Tim?
Well, I didn't for some time. I'm uncomfortable talking about writing because perhaps out of superstition, but I don't think so. I think it deadens the act of writing. You say you're going to do something and you're immediately locked into it.
Yeah.
So I felt, what if I don't want to write this new book and decide against it? I was worried I'd be locked into doing a book I didn't, in the end, want to do.
Yeah.
But Aaron is a persuasive guy, and he's a nice guy. And we became friends. I learned to trust him. And eventually, I didn't really say yes, except provisionally. I said, we'll give it a shot. We'll see how it goes. And over the next several years, Aaron essentially ended up living with me for, big swaths of time.
Yeah.
And with my children and with my wife. He'd follow me around America as I gave talks at colleges and cities and so on. And I just never ended up saying no more than I said yes.
And so what is it like, Tim, to have having a film crew come into your life like this? I mean, following your every move, they see your trials and travails of the creative process. They witness the challenges of family life. I mean, you must have thought this is just too much at some point.
If it hadn't been Aaron, I certainly would have. On a personal level, we have a lot in common. There's an age difference, but we share a great deal. We care especially about art, trying to make something beautiful. He cares about filmmaking. I care about fiction.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty strong bond. And there were times when it felt a little intrusive. I remember at one point I was having I wouldn't say a fight in the physical sense, but a pretty earnest argument with my two kids about video games. I had threatened to ban them in the house permanently and to never allow them access to a computer or an iPhone or an iPad ever again. So this discussion, which went on probably for an hour or more, at times got I wouldn't say angry, but right on the edge of anger. And Aaron was there, not really filming much, a little bit at the beginning of it. He gently left the room, actually went outside while the argument continued. By and large, though, that was rare, that kind of feeling. It felt comfortable having Aaron around.
Yeah. Well, that says a lot about the relationship, but I will say it also seems very natural and comfortable. The snippet of that argument, as you put it, that we see. I've had the exact same argument. I think I've come back with the same thing. You're not going to get to. I may not have said 2 years, but it was probably a year or several months. So it's very, very real to life. I felt. And Aaron, what was it like for you? I mean, we get snippets too that it's obviously trying for the subject to have this camera following them around, and I don't know, maybe sometimes you, in theory, a cantankerous writer battling time, what's it like for the filmmaker to document this?
Well, like Tim said, we share so much in common, and one of the big things we share in common, in addition to taste in movies and books and art, is our families. We both have 2 young kids roughly the same age. So we were both going through the family journey at the same time. And I think it's one of the special things you see and get to experience watching this film, is that you have a great artist. And so many of the stories we were told about great art being made are of these like unencumbered geniuses who don't have to worry about money and family and all the things that regular people have to worry about. And Tim in the film isn't afraid to show in a very personal, honest way that he's encumbered, and I think a lot of people can relate to it. How many of us have had that iPhone video game conversation,
Yeah.
And I think it's a relief to a lot of people to say, oh, wow, Tim O'Brien has that talk also. Screens are driving him crazy as well.
I mean, yeah, I think there's quotes from the film too. I mean, I think, Tim, you say, life gets in the way. Here's a perfect example. The phone rings. I personally was on the phone with the tumble dryer repairman today. These sort of things happened. I mean, that's life. Tim, I mean, what did your family think about all this? And just your sons in particular.
Oh, my sons were at first astonished that anybody would want to take a picture of me, much less film me. They were, why do they want to look at you? And I pretty much agreed with them. It was a sore point, that this why do it sort of thing. I kept telling Aaron that even a documentary requires a certain amount of drama, of contention and struggle and so on.
Yeah.
And Aaron said wisely, don't worry, it's going to come. And it did. And the item you just mentioned is one of those things, the intrusions that life presents. Yeah. Aaron, for example, we were going to film in a small town near Austin, Texas. And we were getting in my car, and the car started kind of, and I was at the wheel, Aaron beside me, and the car rolled out of the driveway, but without any steering. That a fan belt had broken, the power steering was gone, and the car sort of just rolled out into the street and wouldn't go any farther than that.
Yeah.
So he followed me inside and filmed me calling mechanics and tow trucks and all the rest. It's an example of what happens a lot. And when you read biographies of writers, you rarely get these petty little trivial trespasses on life that get in the way of what you really want to do. In this case, we were going to go film a scene for his movie. It happens all the time, though, when I'm working on a book. The phone will ring and it'll, be the swimming pool guy saying there's no water left in your pool. It's all out in the golf course. And then you spend the next 6 weeks trying to get your pool fixed. Things like this happen. And I think it's interesting to make writers human, to watch the joy of making a piece of work, but also the ordinary encumbrances of life itself as they intrude on it and make it difficult to do it. Certain things you just have to pay attention to. And, one of them is, if your toilets are overflowing, you got to fix them.
Yeah. And I think, Aaron, I mean, this we do gain as you've already mentioned, I think this film brilliantly captures a lot of insights into the creative process. I mean, yeah, like you say, there's this sort of stereotype of the, I don't know, author cranking out thousands of words a day or something, or has it all structured and gets up at 6 a.m, has his coffee and gets a few, several pages written or a chapter written. But that doesn't happen, does it? It's certainly not in Tim's case. But I think you even have this great scene with Ben Fountain, even where you're discussing some of these same issues.
Definitely. And it's something that just as a filmmaker, I found particularly gratifying, not just to see somebody else struggle in the misery loves company kind of way, being able to watch Tim's process. And basically, once we started the film, which was like 5 years ago now, and Tim committed to writing the book, which, by the way, at the outset, there was no promise that he was going to finish it. I actually genuinely thought he wasn't going to finish the book, and I was just going to have an ambiguous ending. And I was kind of relaxed. It took a lot of the pressure off me in the beginning. I was thinking like, okay, this film will take me like the next 15 years. I'll work on a bunch of other projects in the meantime. I'll just be able to do it in my, spare time.
Right.
And then suddenly, like at the midway point, I show up and Tim has written, 150 pages, and he tells me he's turned on the gas. I'm like, holy shit, like this is actually happening. He's going to finish this thing. And right at that point, it was like we were kind of on concurrent paths, and being able to watch, and be with a master storyteller as you're trying to tell your own story about the master storyteller, there was undue pressure on me for sure. But I also learned a lot, just little things about writing. I remember one time I asked Tim how he came up with dialogue, and he said one of the purposes of dialogue is to discover your story. And that whole idea of, I love the way he framed that we're constantly discovering our story as you're writing it. That's another kind of misconception I think we have about writing and art, that it's like, it's done, it's in the head, it's all mapped out, and then the artist just kind of, spits it out. And I really could relate to that as a documentary filmmaker, because that's all that time that you spend following the characters in your film around the people who you're making the film about is a process of discovery, a process of trying to figure out, what am I doing with this plan that I have, which is ever evolving, and I found that really fascinating. And I learned so much being around Tim, and I'm extremely grateful.
Well, as someone who's had the privilege of seeing the film, I agree. I think I learned a lot too. I mean, I think, and I wanted to say, spoiler alert. I mean, it is dramatic. I was, you're thinking, I mean, even if you've Googled it and you know that the book's come out and everything, I kept thinking the book's not going to get made. I mean, Tim, you said that it's going to take you another 10 years, I think, at one point. But in terms of your experience, I know you say you don't really like talking about writing, but are your struggles typical, you think, for most authors? Do people, I think Meredith, your wife, mentions even though he hasn't really written much the last few months. Ben Fountain's on there and says he just keeps slogging away. It's a hard slog, I think. This is more typical than the stereotype that we have of the authors, isn't it?
I think so, yes. It is pretty typical. I might take typicality to an extreme, though. I'm extremely slow writer. For example, I'll work on a sentence, sometimes for an entire day, or certainly a paragraph. It's a rare day when more than a paragraph is finished. And even when it's finished, I'll end up tossing it out, because later in the story I won't need it, or it contradicts something later in the story. So it's constantly, as Aaron put it, it's evolving. And I am discovering the story, as I think most writers do. I think that is typical. You may set out with a plan. Jack falls in love with Jill, and they go on the honeymoon, and the yacht sinks, and Jack takes the only life preserver and ends up bobbing alone at his dead wife floating nearby. But as the story is told, you discover new things about your character from what they say and what they do. A friend of mine, John Irving, the novelist, described it as little gremlins popping into your story and sort of taking it over. As you write a piece of dialogue, what you write is not what you had planned to write. The word choice is different, and the meaning becomes different. And you stare at it and you say, wow, that's unexpected, and it also sounds good. It sounds like real human speech.
Yeah.
Which is often unexpected. We sometimes say things, as I'm doing right now, that I sure as hell hadn't planned to say 5 seconds ago.
Right.
But here I am talking. And you discover things out of what you say. It's one of both the joys and the great troublesome aspects of doing what I do, of writing a book. You can only plan so much. And then the characters and the situation, the drama of the story takes command of you. And you're more following it than composing it. You're trying to catch up with where the story is going.
I mean, individual words, the words you use are very important, aren't they? I mean, I imagine that's why,
They are.
Some, maybe to the average ear, you may not even hear sometimes a slight difference, but the difference, especially in English, I think, especially, there's this, each word has this just different, slightly different connotation that makes a whole difference.
Sure does.
Yeah.
I mean, every noun matters, every verb, every comma matters, every periods matter to a writer. When there's a conclusive aspect to an utterance that doesn't ramble on and on. Or in some cases, you want a character to ramble on and on, in which case you have dashes and commas. It's the voice that you're listening to in your head as you're, composing dialogue, or as you're doing narration and so on. You're listening to something inside you, and you're listening to more than one voice. You're listening to myriad voices, a whole orchestra full of voices in your head, only one of which is your own.
And Aaron, I think what Tim was saying about writing is, and as he's already alluded to, I mean, we know that certainly in this era of documentary, but I think it's probably always been true. You have to have a story. You have to have drama and tensions and things like that to make a good doc. But is it? I mean, and that's I would do some work with a production company here, and they do. That's always gets stressed. But the reality is, once the cameras roll, that story changes for the filmmaker as much as it can change for the writer, can't it?
Yeah, for sure. And Tim was aware of that from the beginning, telling me there are no stakes here. He kept the running joke was, I have to die in order for this film to be a film. And Tim was there smoking away, which was the other reason I really wanted to do this film, was that every time I filmed, there was, it was very cinematic with smoke lingering in the back.
It was film noir almost, wasn't it?
Exactly, yeah. But I think, what Tim wasn't accounting for when he would kind of scold me for saying, like, we need a story with stakes where something, it needs to be life and death, is how compelling honesty is, from people, and how rare a thing it is to hear people and be living with people who speak from the heart about those big game issues, about love and death, about the issues that really matter to us. And like Tim said there, I'll give away another spoiler, but Tim almost dies in the film,
Yep.
So the theme of mortality is very much in the film. And there are these big issues, war, art, family, love, death, but because it's Tim O'Brien, he's able to kind of bring these issues down to a very human level and put those kind of perfect words that you were talking about in a way that, make it accessible.
I completely agree, and I think that brings us a good point to maybe interject here with a clip. And actually, we'll go to a quick break as well. But over that break, we'll also play a clip, which is one where I think Tim is I'm not sure if it's something that I'm pretty sure it's something you've written, but then at the end, basically saying it's about Vietnam and your experiences there. And then 50 years on being, thinking back, finishing that paragraph, and did I actually serve in that war? I think is kind of the gist of it. I'm not getting it completely right, but why don't we?
Christ was I in war.
Yeah. Why don't we go to that? We'll go to that clip, and we'll be right back with Tim O'Brien and Aaron Matthews.
It was early in my tour. We went across this rice paddy, and we immediately took sniper fire. The world just exploded in our faces. And then a hand grenade came sailing out of the brush. You could see the fizzling. It was so fast, so scary, so unreal. And what was overwhelming in memory really is nothing but the grenade keeps coming out and it won't stop. After a lapse of 10 or 20 centuries, the grenade detonates. And yet everything that is happening isn't happening because it absolutely and positively cannot be happening. The bee sting sensation in my left hand, a kid named Clausen holding his stomach, somebody shouting, but not shouting words, shouting lizard shouts, and then another bee sting, and all around me and above me, there are the unzipping sounds of eternity passing by. These are bullets, I'm pretty sure. And then, nearly 50 years later, I light a cigarette and take a breath and stare down at this paragraph and think, Christ, was I in a war?
You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with legendary author Tim O'Brien and award-winning director and producer Aaron Matthews. The film we're discussing today is The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien. It's releasing on March 2nd, and you can see it pretty much wherever you stream films, we gather. If nothing else, Google it. I'm sure you'll find it. Johnny Diamond at the Literary Hub says, The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien follows O'Brien on the journey of his last book as he reveals the everyday ties between duty, art, family, and the trauma of war. Aaron, you've already talked about the big themes that that the film just deals with. What makes wars worth fighting? How do we write about war? What are the obligations of citizens with respect to war? What are the after effects of war on individuals and families? And I think there's a few more themes than that, I would argue, that's worth discussing. But we've just seen this clip about, I think it goes back to sort of the discussion we were having about the creative process. And Tim, what was it like not to write for nearly, 17 years as someone who is an author and a writer?
Well, it was mostly a joy to be relieved of that constant, 15 hours a day at a word processor or a computer.
Yeah.
I had 2 children. I loved them and I wanted to be around them and help them live their lives and grow. There was all the time throughout those 17 years, there was this aching sense of guilt that I ought to be squeezing in 20 minutes or half hour a day, writing a story. But the guilt would vanish and go away for a while and then come back an hour later. But it did nag at me. I wanted to somehow balance being a good father with at least writing occasionally. But as we spoke about earlier, life just kept intruding. Kids got the flu or colds or had to be taken to school or picked up at school. And we had to eat, so there were grocery stores to visit and all those things.
Yeah.
I really now can't recall how it was that I even embarked on this latest book. I know my wife had wanted me to write about being a father, and wanted me to write even more especially about being an old man with 2 young kids, and what that felt like, and the burdens of your approaching mortality. You know, no one lives forever, and I would begin imagining my kids without a dad at age, 18 or 21 or 23. And gradually I became convinced that I ought to be leaving for my children at least a mark of their dad's love on paper, something that I wish my own father might have left for me. Just the simple words on a scrap of paper, "I love you, Dad." And I did that in 300 and some 50 pages in my new book, a lot of marks. It was written as a gift to my children, really. And it wasn't a literary book, it wasn't a commercial book, it wasn't a parenting book. It was a bunch of love letters to my children, sometimes framed in story form, and sometimes just picking up an anecdote that they might have used and expanding on it. But in any case, the sense of silence for so long was finally overcome by what I consider to be an act of love.
I think that's beautiful, and I think at least personally, what I took out of this movie is that one of the main themes, and we'll talk about some of the other themes shortly, but I kept it, it's about fatherhood, isn't it? Aaron, would you agree? Isn't that what this film's all about?
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah.
Fathers and sons, American fathers and sons.
Yeah, Turgenev. Yes, it's. I think. We had R.J. Cutler, the documentary filmmaker, on earlier. He's done Belushi, that's out now, and I was asking him about the genius of Belushi, and he said he was on a panel one time with the historian and biographer Walter Isaacson, and this came up: what makes the man? He said in his best faux Southern accent, "It's all about daddy." And do you agree with that? Is that because that comes out in here as well? You're talking about this love letter, Tim, that love letters to your sons, but do we maybe, I don't know, this is not even in my notes, but is this do we maybe underestimate the importance that dads have on their on shaping their children's lives?
I'm not sure if we underestimate it or overestimate it. That's one of the problems of being a father. You can overestimate or underestimate your own importance to your own kid. There are times when I wonder if the kids even listen to the words coming out of my mouth, because they certainly don't do what I ask them to, unless they want to. And then other times I'm shocked at how incredibly penetrating they've been about me. There's an anecdote in the book, and it also appears it's referred to in Aaron's film, where we were on vacation in southern France at a very ritzy resort, way beyond our means. And my wife and I were outside one day having a drink at a bar, and my kids were playing ping pong on a lawn outside. And my cell phone rang. It was my sister calling, and my mother had died halfway around the world. And I remember going over to the ping pong table to tell my kids what had happened. And then I remember for the next hour or two, maybe 3 hours, just playing ping pong with that ball going back and forth over that ping pong tennis table net. Much like my brain was going back and forth with memories of my mom alive, and then the situation at this strange resort where everybody looked like George Hamilton, including the women looked like George Hamilton, kind of bronzed and beautiful. And what a bizarre setting to be in a foreign culture with your mother dead on the other side of the world. Later, we walked down to a small village below the resort where we could eat cheaply. And on the way down a hill with the Mediterranean down below, sun setting, I was holding my older son's hand. His name is Timmy.
Yeah.
And at the time he was probably 8, maybe 7 years old. And I said to him, are you thinking about Grandma? And Timmy was silent for a moment, and then he looked up at me and said, no, I'm thinking about you thinking about Grandma.
Mm.
Well, that is an example of what I meant by you're astonished.
Yeah.
At a 7 or 8 year old kid uttering those words of empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
That he was reading, he was inside my mind, imagining what must be happening and that ping pong feeling in my head.
Yeah.
So in that kind of case, it's hard to overestimate what you can learn from your own children or deliver to your own children.
Yeah. I think that's incredible. And I think as fathers and anyone else who's on this, who's listening or watching, who's a parent will know, I think knows that feeling. I think we all have hopefully all have a similar story. Aaron, was this the intent to capture fatherhood as when you started this film?
For sure. It was one of the big themes, because Tim is wrestling with his relationship with his own father as he's writing this book to his children. So fatherhood was very much an important part of the film, among many other themes,
Yeah. I think, some of the other themes that obviously there's this, it's, I don't want to shy away from it. Obviously the whole, and I think maybe it's a good time for another clip that we have, which is kind of goes back in time a little bit because it's got a lot of archival with it about, I know Tim's frustration, certainly as you said, your period of not writing kind of, besides corresponding with fatherhood, also corresponded with new wars in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think you're on C-SPAN where you're basically saying, you find this whole thing really sad, what's happening. I think that would be a good way of introducing maybe sort of another, maybe a little more discussion about some of these themes that come up in the film. And so if you don't mind, let's watch that or listen to that clip, and then we'll be right back with Tim and Aaron.
When Vietnam collided with my life, I yearned for revenge against the cheerleaders and celebrators of war. Somehow I imagined I would strike back with sentences. It was a ludicrous and naive fantasy. Sentences don't do shit.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. We must take the battle to the enemy.
As a man who served in a war, who watched death, who looked at corpses day after day after day, I'm here to tell you, be careful, be cautious. Don't go killing people unless it's absolutely necessary.
The whole purpose of my writing, at least in part, was so people would think twice about going to war for silly reasons. I've been constantly disappointed.
Coalition forces are battling an enemy determined and difficult to identify.
They're to the left of us!
I couldn't believe it. Sitting in my living room watching the wars happen in Iraq and Afghanistan, asking myself the same questions I asked about Vietnam. Why are we here? What are we accomplishing?
I feel sad about the world. I feel sad about more war talk, more bodies. It's sad.
Tim, do you still feel that way? I mean, because Iraq and Afghanistan so that was a time when they were still in the nightly news. They're not really anymore. I think it comes out in the film, but your frustrations about how we, American society, but just generally people see war. I think a very poignant thing for me was you talking about how we don't talk about the rectitude of wars anymore. These frustrations haven't gone away, have they?
No, they'll never go away. Wars, unlike pandemics, are man-made. It's not some virus mutating and evolving and killing us. And we're doing it to ourselves. A kind of mutual suicide that's been going on for centuries. I see no end to it. But that doesn't mean I can't be depressed by it and saddened by it and outraged by it. And I think if I were to choose one of those words, it would mainly be outraged. I find it outrageous that we can spend 15 years in Vietnam killing 3 million people. And you go to a school in America and they know nothing about Vietnam War. Who won? They often don't know. And I'm not exaggerating. It's sad that there are all these dead people and, 45, 50 years later, we don't remember what it was about, why it was fought, who won, what the issues were, if they crossed anyone's mind at all. There's also the subterranean issue running beneath this current of man's seeming unappeasable appetite for killing people. It seems unappeasable. We'll do it and then not remember why. That's Vietnam. But it's also true of the Battle of Hastings. Who remembers what that was all about?
Yeah.
Very few people, even I suspect, even in the UK, understand much about the underlying causes. Was it a good war, a bad war? Did the right people win the war? Was it worth fighting? Was it worth killing for? Was it worth dying in? Very few people recall. What about the Reconquista in Spain, lasting 700, 800 years, 7 million dead people? I doubt more than, 1/8% of the people on the planet even heard the word Reconquista, much less know anything about it.
Yeah.
You could hear the outrage in my voice. It will not go away, and it shouldn't go away. There should, in fact, be more people outraged by this. But no, we watch our daily news. We might say, boy, that's stupid to our wife, and then turn it off and, go have a cocktail and forget it.
But and in the film, you say, or maybe it's even part of the archival clip, you shouldn't fight for, I think it's said a few times, we shouldn't fight for stupid reasons. Are there ever any good reasons for a war?
At the time, they're all good reasons to the people who are for the war. Hitler had good reasons. They were insane and evil, but to him, they were good reasons. God's on everybody's side. That's a good reason. They're on the side of Allah, and they're on the side of the Christian God, the Judeo-Christian God. They're on everybody's side. That's kind of the problem, I think, is that there are these reasons that let's contain communism. That was the essential ground level reason for the war in Vietnam. Let's contain its spread. And that's what John Foster Dulles, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon all proclaimed. Let's stop this evil from spreading. Well, now we have a brand new, and that one seems to have vanished from our perspective. We've forgotten about it by and large until Putin does something like he did yesterday. And then we remember. But yeah, all the reasons at the time can be made to sound at least palatable, if not righteous. And they're framed in such a way as to sound that way to a lot of people. The difficulty is years later, decades later, or centuries later, the reasons don't stand up very well. In fact, they become so trivial as to have been forgotten. That's odd. to forget why 7 million people died.
And specifically about the Vietnam War, I mean, I sometimes get the feeling that this is, for many Americans, they sort of see the thing is, instead of Vietnam being typical of wars, they see Vietnam as the anomaly almost. And that, if generals are always fighting the last war or whatever they are doing and we as societies are doing, it's almost like, well, just don't make that mistake anymore. And somehow this war is different. The next one is.
Well, if you read Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five, or you read Joseph Heller, Catch-22, the absurdities of it all were apparent even in this Righteous War to both of those excellent writers.
Yeah.
In part, I think that's what a fiction writer is for. It's to remind us of things that in our childhood we kind of knew instinctually, not in our heads, but just knew that you don't kill people for stupid reasons, that you don't do absurd things with your life. And I think Homer reminded us of that in the Iliad, that all that death going on and that, during the siege of Troy, with people listening to the gods, egging them on or, bidding them adieu, either way, there's a certain craziness about it. I've often wished I could spend 20 minutes with Homer, just asking him a barrage of questions. Like, for example, do you, Homer, really believe that Zeus was talking to Achilles? Do you really believe that? Or is that a metaphor or a symbol? Because you write it as if it's really happening. And I get a feeling sometimes that the presidents of the United States seem to believe that God is talking to them, at least our most recent president, or our most recently vacated president.
Yeah.
Maybe evacuated is the better word.
Yeah. Well, I think you're talking about those 20 minutes. I think some people could ask similar questions of you about some of your work. What is really happening or not happening? But Aaron, I mean, just to sort of, I know as you said, you met Tim on the this film you did on the draft, and what struck me is some of the points you said very early on. For most of us, as speak as an American, are completely unaffected by these wars. It's not like, as Tim was saying or says in the film, there was this constant discussion about the rectitude of the Vietnam War. We know about World War II and other wars. Society was affected, certainly here in the UK, obviously. But, except for I have to say, I have a brother who served several tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. And if it weren't for him, I think I would have, and if I didn't follow the news necessarily, I would, life was going on as if there was nothing happening. Is that something you capture in your film on the draft?
Yeah, and it really was the motivation, the one of the original motivations for making this film. When Tim talks about people, and when like you were saying, people just going about their daily lives and not being affected by the war, that was me. I was living in that bubble, and in a sense, that still is me. It's very easy in America not to remain unaware and unaffected by the wars that we are waging right now, that are happening right now. And I wanted. It was kind of this unveiling for me as being around Tim and hearing him break it down, and it made me want to kind of spread the gospel in that way and explore America's fraught relationship with the war and the military. And Tim seemed to me someone who was perpetually grappling with something we should all be wrestling with. What does it do to live in a highly militarized nation, engaged in military action around the world, with a culture and politics so revolved, so steeped in war, which we are in America? What does that do to us as people? What does it do to us as individuals?
I think now, and Tim mentioned it briefly earlier, and I was curious because, as you said, now that I think about it, certainly it comes out in the language and how we describe things. And we may not in this last year or so been talking too much about military conflicts, but we've got COVID-19, and we keep hearing about a war against an invisible enemy. And I mean, Tim,
that's
how
a
does
great
that?
example? You know, so many of the metaphors that we use in general are connected to war, and you know, like you said, we're on a battlefield with this virus. You know, embattled politicians are in their bunkers running campaigns to mount offensives, and our nurses and doctors are on the front lines. And again, like, what does that do to have this thing, war, that is so brutalizing, as Tim points out in the film, to make it so much of our lives? And also, what does it do to our response to these things, whether it's a pandemic or just everyday matters, when we apply war to the way we think about them? You know, do we want to respond to every one of our
Crisis or
obstacles or crises in our life as if it's a war? Is that the best response? You know,
Tim, what do you think?
Everything Aaron just said I agree with that. Do we want to? The answer is, I don't know. I think that's why Aaron framed it as a question.
Yeah.
If I were to guess, knowledge is imperfect, but I'd say probably not. Probably that should not be the governing metaphor that we use in so much of our lives. The war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war on terror. It goes from the petty to the big, massive warfare. But it's applied to so many aspects of our life. It's like, in America, in any case, as a governing metaphor for much of what we do. And my guess would be that's not healthy. That it's a learned tradition, I believe, stretching way back. But it would be best, I think, if we were to at least ameliorate it, to find other metaphors to talk about our lives and our problems, whether they're crises or just problems, to try not to frame them in terms that are essentially, war means killing people. That's what a real war is. Yeah. And by somehow getting that violent aspect into our discussions about petty problems and using it as a metaphor, just strikes me as unhealthy.
And do you think it, well, I'm going to struggle with the right word, but do you think it belittles what you and others went through in terms of your experiences going through a real war?
I think even the word war belittles what we went through. It's such an abstract word, it's almost without meaning because it's been stretched over such a wide terrain of experience. I think we ought to dispense with the word war. And we ought to, wipe it from Shakespeare, wipe it from my books, wipe it from newspapers and magazines, and substitute the words killing people, including children. So instead of declaring war in Congress, you declare we're going to kill people, including children. And you have to utter those words. Otherwise, it's become a kind of euphemism. It's so abstract to those who haven't been in it. And it kind of whitewashes the experience of death, of witnessing death and participating in it, of watching it happen, of almost dying oneself or of dying oneself. Yeah. It's such an abstract word that unless you're actually engaged in it, it doesn't approximate the actual event of it all. This is true not just of soldiers. They're among the victims of war, but what about their wives? And what about their children? What about their neighbors and friends and the people who have to live with them? In some ways, a gold star mother, a mother who has lost a child in war, is more of a victim of war than the person who died, because the person who died is dead, doesn't worry about it any longer, but the mother carries it into old age and will jerk awake at 2 a.m. and ask where her kid is. And her kid's been dead for 50 years.
Yeah.
That's a burden. And it's a little bit what that encompasses what I was trying to say about this word war itself. It really has a euphemistic quality that's bothersome to me.
Yeah. Well, I will still use the word because I'm not very good with.
Well, I just did too.
Exactly. But I think a really poignant well, there's many poignant parts of this film, but the thing that I had never really thought of is this idea of the after effects of war on individuals and families. And as you said, you've already mentioned the Gold Star mother, but as you mentioned, long after you're gone, the ghost of the Vietnam War specifically will be passed on to your sons.
Yes. Alas, that's true. They call it, when I glaze out and I go back in memory for an instant or two at the dinner table or just sitting with my kids, they recognize I've left, and they know where I've gone in my head briefly. Yeah. I can't say it happens a lot. That would be an exaggeration, but it happens occasionally, every month or two.
Yeah.
And they know it, and they recognize it, and they fall silent. And they give me the peace to remember and feel bad. But yeah, they're going to be the inheritors of the Vietnam War, and they already are in a lot of ways. They're intellectually not too interested in it, but emotionally they're engaged in it because they live with a guy who was in it.
Yeah. I mean, you've just raised that point, and I was going to ask you, because it's been a few years now. What is Timmy? What, about 18 now or so?
17. Yep.
17. So, have they started showing any interest yet? Have they started asking you questions about
Finally, Timmy has. It's taken a long time.
Yeah.
But he's now embarked on reading 2 books in preparation, really, for going to college next year.
Yeah.
One of them is The Things They Carried that I wrote, and another is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah.
It wasn't until very, very recently, maybe the last 3-4 weeks, that I began getting inklings when he'd come up to me at night and say, "What do you recommend I read?" I have recommended he not read The Things They Carried until he's old enough to withstand the frustrations of that book. What's real? What's not real? What happened? What didn't happen? There is a lot of frustrations for young readers with that book that later on are not quite as frustrating. But now he is interested, and that's a kind of relief, because I've been belly aching to Aaron for 5 years. Why don't they want to read my books? What's wrong with these kids? I'm their father. And if my dad were Ernest Hemingway, by God, I'd have read The Sun Also Rises by now or something.
Exactly. Well, it's like my kids don't even watch this podcast. I don't know if they've even seen an episode, but that's
gotta hurt. Well, it's the same story.
Yeah.
My kids don't watch my films. I'll just join the club.
Yeah, it does remind me. Yes, well, it's not even a story I need to share. Just I had an old boss at The Economist who one time said, "Oh, we were both heading home after a trip to North Canada, actually," and he said, "How old are your kids?" And I think they're at that point they would have been like 3 and 4, my older 2. And he's like, "Oh, you're still at that age where they're happy to see you." I come home and I'm lucky if I get a grunt, you know.
Yeah, me too.
We've just spent a lot of time talking about, again, I'll use that word, war. Another thing that comes out in the film is you note, you didn't use the word curse, but you said it's sort of being good. You know that you're going to be described as a war writer in your obit, and we know it's obviously served as a backdrop. You obviously write about a lot of different themes, and you know, I think as you would tell us and probably tell your students at Texas State, you write about what you know, and your experiences, and that serves as a background. But how do you? I mean, if you were to be able to write that obit, what would you want to be remembered for?
As a writer, I doubt Joseph Conrad's an English writer, as you know. I doubt that his obit began. Joseph Conrad, the great ocean writer, died this morning at age whatever.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be described as an ocean writer, though many of his stories, as you know, were not only set on the ocean, the sea, but had their sources of passion coming from his experience as one. But he wasn't called an ocean writer. It's Philip Roth is not described as a suburb writer, though most of his stories, nor is Updike. Toni Morrison, the American Nobel Prize winner, I think would be aghast, and she has been described as a Black writer or African American writer. It's a kind of racial box you're put in.
Yeah.
She would yell at you, I'm almost sure, were she a living. She'd yell, I'm a writer. It's a strange pigeonholing that goes on. It's largely commercial in its source. It's the first thing said about a book. How do we describe it on the cover of a book or in a film? That said, it's inevitable that it's going to happen. That would be my obit, and I'm resigned to it. It's not life or death to me. I don't like it, but I don't like death itself, and I'm going to die someday. I can't do a whole lot about it.
Except certainly write about it.
Except write about it, yeah.
I mean, I think actually, I may have even overrun a little bit. I think we're coming. Hard for me to believe, at least, maybe not for you, but we're coming to the end of our time together, gentlemen. And it's been a thrill having you on. Aaron, I've let Tim do a lot of the talking here, but of late. But maybe you can say more if you want to say anything more about this project, or maybe you can tell us about what's next for you.
I'm happy to have Tim grab the microphone, as he should. Well, the other thing I would just say, we've dealt with the heavy themes of the film, and one thing you get out of this film that I'd just like people to know is that, like, as you maybe can tell from this podcast, Tim is extremely warm and funny, and it's the other reason why I wanted to make the film. The first time I interviewed him, he had me like crying, but also laughing. We share a kind of dark sense of humor, and he's got a gallows humor that is a running joke, running theme throughout the film. He's got a really warm family, and two boys who are adorable and whip smart, and you'll get to meet them in the film. And yeah, I guess like the other thing I would say is that especially we're living in dark days right now, and Tim is a good companion. I think that people will find some comfort in kind of sharing the struggles of life with someone who has had his own share of struggles and has embraced struggle, I think, almost as a way of life. It's to struggle is to live, and to live is to care, and all of that is a burden, but it's almost not worth living without it,
I think you raise an excellent point, and can I second that? It's not too many documentaries I laugh out loud, especially ones that have such serious topics as interweaved through the narrative. And I will say I don't want to give anything away, but I definitely was more than just chortling. I think I love the scene at the gas station. I think that's just typical of a lot of stuff that goes on in that film. Little things too. You zoom in on a coffee mug with a funny message on it. I won't say what it says. It's not because it's a family program. I mean, I will say that if for those with sensitivities about profanity, maybe you might want to steer clear for parts of the film. I don't know. But it's extremely warm. I think it's very, it's amazing. I think what you've captioned, I think it's amazing, Tim, that you've opened up your life to us like this. And I think we will all we all are appreciative for that.
Yeah, we owe him a debt of gratitude for sure, because that intimate feeling you get in the film is really because of Tim and Meredith and Timmy and Tad,
Yeah. And I've got to think once this thing starts streaming and people start seeing it, I mean, it's just got to, I know it's not that it's had a low profile. You've been to some festivals and things like that and been selected, but, and I've already alluded to some articles that have been written, but I just got to think it's one of these, I hate to put it this way. This is not what a filmmaker wants to hear, but it's one of these hidden gems at the moment. It soon will not be hidden anymore. And Tim, maybe I can ask you one last question, if you don't mind. Is Dad's Maybe book really your last book?
Well, I hadn't thought so. I thought that up with every book. Perhaps not. I am 74 years old, and God knows what will happen as soon as this podcast is over. I may drop dead. I probably will.
Well, I'm glad we got it in the can.
but if that doesn't happen, there may be another.
Yeah. Well, I sure hope there is. And I have to admit, hands up, I haven't read Dad's Maybe book yet, but based on the certainly, and I have had the privilege of reading some of your other stuff, but have to say, based on the comments I've seen online in various places, it's definitely one that I'm going to pick up. And so, I'll just draw a line right there. Thank you, both of you, Tim O'Brien, Aaron Matthews. It's been a pleasure having you on. We'd love to have you on again if we haven't scared you off, and if there's maybe the War and Peace of Tim O'Brien Part 2, or if there's whatever, if you can imagine that. So anyway, to our listeners and viewers, yes, that's the film we've been talking about. I want to give a thanks also to This is Distorted Studios here in Leeds, England. Nevin Apaunovich, our podcast manager, who ensures we continue getting such great guests, such as Tim and Aaron, onto the show. And a big thanks to our listeners. We've certainly built up quite an audience in the last year or so, and thankful for your loyalty and as well as your feedback, whether it's on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. Keep the comments and episode ideas coming. It is very much appreciated. And as always, please remember to like us and share us with your friends and family wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off.
You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.